I wanted to show you what inequality is actually in the U.S. right now. This may be the first picture of inequality in the U.S. that anyone's actually seen. It's a result of a study I've done with Alan Auerbach, who's a professor at Berkeley, and Daryl Kohler, who's an engineer, software engineer in my company, which does economic financial planning software, produces that. Now, I think it's important to know what inequality is because that's one of the public goods. Before we start raising tax rates to super high levels or cutting them, we should know where we're starting from or adding more programs to make things more complicated. We should understand what's going on, including tax avoidance, because that's very important. And this study tries to deal with tax avoidance both at the corporate tax level and also at the personal tax level. But inequality really is not about comparing a Warren Buffett who's 80 with somebody who's 20, because the person who's 20, is going to pay taxes the rest of his life. Warren Buffett maybe paying very few taxes, little taxes right now, but he paid taxes when he was younger. So it's really important to kind of make this sensible, to compare differences within a cohort, within an age group. And our study is taking data from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, running it through a life cycle financial planning software program that figures out for individual households how much they're going to be spending over the rest of their life in order to have a smooth living standard. But the key thing about this software is it's taking into account all the different fiscal programs in the United States. There are about 40 different fiscal programs. The federal income tax, personal federal income tax, has about 10 different programs right inside it. There's food stamps, there's health care benefits, there's Social Security, there's state sales taxes, state income taxes. All these things combine to impact inequality. Now, I want to show you what Thomas Piketty was talking about, and then show you true inequality in the U.S. If you look at the blue columns here, and I was here last year to debate Thomas Piketty about his new book, which I felt had a lot of problems on both the economic side in terms of the economic theory and also in terms of the numbers. But one of the biggest problems was he's just looking at wealth as a measure of inequality, and wealth is one important component, but it's not everything. You wouldn't want to just look at welfare benefits and say, gee, a society that has where welfare benefits are unequally distributed is a very unequal society, because we know in that analysis it would look like the poor were getting all the benefits and the rich were getting nothing, and it would look like a society that was very egalitarian, when in fact it might not be when you take everything into account. So he was just looking at the blue columns. So for example, the top 1% of the age group 40 to 49-year-olds in the US, they control about 17% of the wealth. So Piketty would say, well, that's extremely unequal. It's a 17-to-1 ratio. They should only have 1% of wealth if we had perfect equality in wealth holdings, but they have 17%. And they're only 1% of the people. But when you look at their actual spending power, it turns out they only have 9% of the spending power when you actually do the work correctly and carefully and inclusively. So that's the difference between doing half of the job poorly versus doing all the job carefully. This is the result of a 2-year study that we worked on. And here's just 2 more slides. This is showing you, if you look at the blue bars, what the average tax rate is for the top 1%. It's almost 50% of their resources are being taken away from them in the form of taxes net of transfers. And for the lowest quintile, the lowest 20%, their net tax rate over the rest of their life is negative 32%. Now, this is not a political document. This is just pure, economics here and quite careful analysis. It's not designed to produce any political statement. It's just what we find here, which is a highly progressive fiscal system. It still leaves a lot of inequality, but it's much more fair than most people know. Let me just show you one last slide, which is the marginal tax rates that the top 1% are facing. When you combine all the 40 programs, well, it's about 72% at the margin. If you earn another $1,000 and you spend that, and you're in the top 1%, you spend that smoothly through time, you have a lot of labor taxes to pay to state and federal governments. Then you have a lot of asset income taxes to pay as you save some of this money and have to pay corporate taxes and personal taxes and higher Medicare Part B premiums and all kinds of things when you combine everything. But the other thing that Dr. Hahn was really pointing us to is the complexity leads to very high marginal taxes and work disincentives for everybody. You have the lowest 20% facing a marginal tax. The median marginal tax is 43%. That's a very big disincentive to save. So we have fiscal systems that have been put in place on a piecemeal basis, and we can get the same amount of revenue with lower taxes, and I think equal amount of progressivity, if not more, with fundamental tax reform, fundamental spending reform, and so I agree very much with both Dr. Hahn and with the other speakers that we need to have concern about inequality, concern about that public good, which is our collective altruism, but also we have to think about economic efficiency and what are we doing and do the best job with our resources to get to those public ends. Thank you.
Thank you.
The World Knowledge Forum